Changing the world step by leap, that's right. And I have all I've got all the sort of starter stuff here. So I often start my talks by just saying a little bit about who I am. I think you know most of this already. Born and bred in Wales, but lived lots of other places for a long time, but back in Swansea. But I did spend quite a few years in Tyree, and sometime or other we'll have another Tyree Tech Wave there, but goodness knows when. And the Foundry, I'm director of the Computational Foundry, and it's partly a building. It's a £31 million project by the university, the Welsh government, and lots of EU funding. So I always say that underneath the soil, the sand on which it's built is all Welsh sand, but pretty much every brick above that is European bricks. And it's a building, it houses maths and computer science, but it's a building that is about building community, a digital community, both within the university and across Wales, and has a mission to do work that matters, to do fundamental computational research that matters. And that's not an easy thing. You often have very applied work and you have very strong theoretical work, but how do you put the two together is not always easy. There's various things I'm not going to tell you about today, but I thought I'd mention them very briefly, although they're relevant. So I have worked quite a lot on IT for small communities, which is not irrelevant and connected with my work on Tyree. And again, I think I mentioned it earlier, and you can see the rucksack on my back there that says Alan Walks Wales. In 2013, I walked around Wales as a research journey. So you can do interesting research that isn't necessarily sitting in your office. And actually from today, I could walk around Wales again, but obviously I wouldn't have been able to for the last few months. And there's lots of other things I'm not going to talk about today, but I'll put them there just in case you look at one of those and think, oh, that's interesting. And there's some other things which I have been talking about a lot recently. So I mentioned there's the COVID. I've got some work I've been thinking about the way in which COVID affects HCI. And again, all of these there's links to my site. I've had a statistics for HCI book published recently, and I'm just working on a new edition of an artificial intelligence textbook that I did years and years and years ago with Janet Finley, and updating that, and I'm hoping to have a stronger human theme through that. And also something else I thought I might have talked about today, which I'm not, because I think it would have overlapped, and I think Raymond's talk covered a lot of these but some of these issues about doing research and some of the emotional journeys there. But anyway, those are things, again, I've got materials elsewhere on, so I'm not going to talk about those today. So having said what I'm not going to talk about today, what I want to do is just talk a little bit about these issues about how you do work which makes a difference in the world and yet is also sort of strong academically. So why does this matter to me? So I've got personal drives, and I know quite a lot of you, if I look at the topics you're dealing with, they're dealing with things that they're health-related topics, they're to do with, I think there was some bias there, stuff there, isn't there, and issues that are meaningful issues in the world. So I think quite a lot of us want to do things that make a difference in the world, but we've also got to be academic. So some of the drivers why I want to make a difference in the world. So, I mean, I come from effectively a working class background. My dad died when I was quite young. So I was brought up, my mum was on widow's benefit. So I was a benefit scrounger as a child. But also I had things that really made a difference to me that helped me, shall we say, break through from that. I mean, my parents were perhaps a generation older than a lot and really valued education. And that was, there's various things that I look at my life and I think, if my life had been only a tiny bit different, I wouldn't be in the position I was today. My closest friend from junior school ended up as an alcoholic with no qualifications, no job. I don't know where he is now, to be honest, if he's alive. So there's some perfect things. But also, like my dad, as I mentioned, my dad, he was not educated in the sense he'll have left school, I guess, at 14, but he was a builder and a carpenter. And as put practical innovation, he did things, he made things. And And that has always been something that's been very strong to me. Whenever I look at a table, I've got a wooden table here, I want to look underneath and see how it's been put together. But then also my first love was mathematics, and give me anything and I'll think of a theoretical angle on it. So these things, for me personally, both these issues about how you make a difference in society, but from an academic point of view, you want to do things that are very practical, but also with a theoretical edge. So I have very strong personal drivers for this. There's also bits of my work that I think, that speak very much into this. So in 1992, so just think about that, 1992, that's 28 years ago. And actually the work for this will have been a bit before. In fact, the date on that says October 1991. And the original workshop this was based on was in January 1991. I wrote a paper which was called Choose Good Names for Your Papers that help people realise them. It's not the most meaningful name and not the most helpful name, but this was, as far as I'm aware, certainly in the HCI literature, and possibly it might be the first paper, or certainly one of the first, that talked about the dangers of gender and ethnic bias in black box machine learning systems. So back in 1992, gave examples, offered partial solutions, broad heuristics, really meaningful. And I knew it was important work. But what I did, I published it, and then I thought I'd done my job. We talked about this earlier in the Doctoral Consortium. And to be fair, I was at a different career stage. There wasn't social media in the same way. There wasn't the conversation. There wasn't things. But I thought, I'm an academic. I've published it. I've told the world. Boom, that's it. And I knew it was important. And it's only very, very recently that I've picked that sort of strand of work up again. So both that was, both something to be proud of in a way of seeing these issues and caring about these issues, but also that emphasis that if something's important, sometimes you actually have to do more than just publish it and push it. And of course, I said that's an issue now which is everywhere. So there's a lot of guilt as well here that, why didn't I do more at the time? If I've started, I should always do this. I've already said this, yes. But it was just these academic drivers. And I said, particularly also, you're at an earlier career stage, you have to live within the academic driver. So the whole publication thing is you've published your stuff, you've got your citation out there, and then you move on to the next thing. And that's what I did. Rather than following this up and actually making a difference. And so I look back on that and sort of think what could have been different there. Recently, I'm involved, and this is again something some of you know about already, but others might be interested in. I'm part of an EPSC network plus called Not Equal. We've just had our second funding round for that, so that there won't be more funding rounds, but we're also still looking out for events and sponsoring events. And this is all about looking at the digital economy and how we can use digital technology for social justice. And it's got a number of strands. I'm looking after the algorithmic social justice strand, but there's also a digital security for all strand, which is about what makes ordinary people feel secure rather than necessarily all the cryptographic things. And then the fairer futures for business and workforce, which is, amongst other things, issues like gig economy. And there's obviously one of the papers here was on those kind of issues. One of the things that came out of, I think, was our first sandpit, and I did this originally thinking about the algorithmic social justice strand, but then we realised it was something that applied to all of the strands and something you might think about, I think, in your own work, might touch your own work. So I was realising that most of what I tended to talk about within this sort of algorithmic social justice strand was these issues of things like bias in AI and, or it might be things like AI and weaponized autonomous systems and that. And it was always the red thing here, the looking at, what was going wrong and how can we avoid it? And I was realizing actually there's a whole set of other issues that I needed to look at. So at the bottom I put doing it right, if Uber comes and says, we'd like to make our Uber platform really just socially, what do we do? What advice would I have for them? And, and lots of people, sometimes, people are cynical and they just want to make their money and everything. But other times people actually do want to do the right thing and they don't know what. So again, from a research point of view, what would I learn that might help people do the right thing when they want to? And then on the top right, on that blue quadrant, I've got positive action. These are the things we might do in a bad world that make it better. So, this might be the app that allows Uber drivers to organise and talk to us, and something like that. And then there's a number of things which are actually we have less power over, I think, but certainly when you're more junior, perhaps as you get a lot further on, you've got more policy control. But particularly, I put in the middle access, and I think this is an issue that is just, was clear before if you knew things, but often people, if you were in reasonably privileged, both educationally or socially privileged, you just didn't realise how little access people have to digital technology, and the COVID crisis has really brought that to a head. So it's something that if you knew about it, you understood before. So all of our actions in our computational world, when we make the digital world important, we disenfranchise large chunks of the community. In Wales, there's a figure of, it was 10% of people have not accessed the internet at all, if ever in their lives, within the last 3 months. That's a really low bar. It's not using it regularly. It's not feeling confident at all touched the internet in the last 3 months. And then a much, much bigger number who haven't, who don't have sort of full control. And that will be very, very different depending on your social circumstances. And then around this, I put issues of policy and governance and stuff. And I'm realizing I should have popped this up before, but on the avoiding harm. It's not new. I said I was in 1992 writing about the dangers of gender and ethnic bias, but this is a book from the 1960s. This guy Harvey Matsu was, worrying about the way in which sort of computers are rising and might cause all sorts of problems in the world. Okay, so I'll do this quite quickly. Related to this, one of the things I've become aware of a while, and it's sort of brought together streams of thought to me, is the ways in which digital technology could make positive changes in society, but the way in which they won't necessarily happen. This is South Wales, and it's the mining valley. So you've got a photograph of the rivers thing. The area that's in there is a mountainous area. It's the coal mining valleys north of Cardiff, north of Swansea. And as an area, they're a mountainous area, and there's rivers that run down from them to the sea, which all seems absolutely reasonable until you look at the underlying geology. And the geology is a syncline. It's like a basin that the rock strata are lower in the middle and go up at the edge. That's why it was economically important, because the coal strata came up at the edge. People knew they were there, and then they could deep mine later because they realised that the strata going down. But given it's a basin, why isn't there just a huge lake in the middle of that mountainous area? Or at very least a series of rivers that all flow to one point, then comes down as a big massive river. You'd expect the river pattern to be completely different. And the reason is the river pattern was there before the land changed. And it's one, I don't remember words very easily, but it's one of the phrases I remember from geography in school. It's a superimposed drainage pattern. So you had a drainage pattern that existed that matched the geology of the land. And then the syncline formed over millions of years. And the rivers just continued to dig the same paths. And I contend that digital technology does the same today. So the digital geology is shifting beneath our feet, but the patterns of industry, the patterns of healthcare, the patterns of government, the patterns of education just keep digging the same paths. Now, so not universally so, and there are counterexamples, but so often what digital technology does is just reinforce the existing patterns. So effectively, we have digital technology which just maps all of the constraints of the 19th century Industrial Revolution, or perhaps earlier than that. So this was about 2 years ago. I wrote a column for interactions, and it was the abracadabra column. So I could have a magic wand and change something in the world. And so I said, well, what if the Silicon Revolution happened before the Steel Revolution? Or we had digital technology before the Medicis and banking. How might the world be, or how could the world be different if you absolutely think before we've got industry, before we've got banking, before we've got any healthcare, we had digital technology sitting around? What might be things? And then try to do effectively, Tom was talking about, digital fiction, about sort of design fiction. And this is sort of like a bit like a design fiction writ large. So can you think quite radically? So here's a few examples, and you're sure you can think of some for yourself. So again, actually, this was during .com years. I thought this was going to happen. You know, why do we have to buy two shoes of exactly the same shape and size, given our feet are different sizes? And everybody's feet are slightly different sizes. And in fact, why do I have to wear a pair of shoes that are designed for a particular standardized foot, not the feet I've got, which tend to be a bit wide, so I wear sandals all the time? And the reason is because you need boxes of shoes in a shoe shop. So the logistics of the delivery of shoes through physical shops on the high street to people is what governs the kind of shoes we can have. In an internet world, when you're picking from a warehouse, that does not need to be the case. So we can think of different worlds like that. So that's just should we say, a consumer choice one. Think about white goods. You know, washing machines are thrown out now. The design life of washing machines has reduced over the years. The reason for that is not just cynical manufacturers trying to get more washing machines sold. It's because most people throw out their washing machine at about 2/3 of the design life, because it's become a fashion item. So white goods in kitchens are fashion items, and they are thrown away and discarded before they wear out. If you're the kind of person who keeps them until they do wear out, you'll find that any repairs often cost more than buying a new one. But what if it was different? So digital fabrication will change this. So things like parts warehouses for manufacturers will have digital manufacturing rather than things being sent. But the same logistic patterns of having the parts warehouse selling to people will continue. Why couldn't Hoover be an IP company rather than a manufacturing company? Why can't the person with the white van who comes to your house to repair the washing machine just print the part? There are different ways, and as well as having an impact then on your consumer choice, on the environment in terms of things being thrown out, why can't the local digital artisan design you a new fascia which has perhaps 3 big buttons for the washes you do all the time? Well, so that improves your consumer choice. It's environmentally sound, but also it creates skilled manual jobs close to markets. And this is what, as in both through automation and digital things, we have destroyed a whole segment of of work in our country. We've got really, the normal way you think about what do you do when you make manufacturing digital? What do you do if you want to bring back, manufacturing to Britain, make Britain great again, all that? What do you think about? You think about building a big factory, filling it with robots, having half a dozen really well-paid, highly skilled people, and then a load of other people cleaning the floors. We do not actually do anything. We destroy manufacturing where it is, if we do that currently. So we destroy jobs around the world, and we don't create any locally that are actually meaningful. So, but things could be different. I mean, similarly, I won't go into this. There's fashion industry. You can think of similar stories here. Why can't you do perhaps most of the manufacturing wherever it's cheaper still, so you don't destroy jobs there, but do various finishing jobs close to hand that improve choices? So I think there are some radical ways you can reimagine things. But one of the problems you get, so I'm sort of thinking about these sort of things, all great thinking and all that. But when you actually sort of come to sort of want to do work in these things, we are governed by the fact that we're academics living within academic structures, and who hasn't heard about REF, even as PhD students? Yeah, actually, I've forgotten who it is in Illinois, but you may not. But in the UK, I don't think, which is our research assessment exercise, or then your careers are determined by all sorts of factors. So you might be if you're a sort of theoretical researcher, you often, and actually in general, the research assessment exercise or the research excellence framework (REF) is driven by taking a paper, saying how good it is, how good marks. In computing, and I did an analysis of this post the previous one. I hope this will be better for the next one, but basically, any sort of applied work was massively discounted in comparison with theoretical work, and by massively discounted, you had to be in the top 5% of papers worldwide to get your paper ranked 4-star, the top rank. If you're in a theoretical area, you had to be in the top 0.5% worldwide to get top rank in an applied area. So, what we do is, theoretical research, you do your research, and say you're a theoretical person, but you also want to have your work applied. And impact, everybody says impact's important nowadays. So what do? You have your research questions, which we hopefully are well formulated, if we've been listening to Raymond, well formulated. You generate your publications, your new knowledge, and then hopefully either yourself or perhaps somebody else tries to take that knowledge and find an application for it. And find an application might be a matchmaking thing. You think, oh, I know some knowledge, but often is oh my goodness, I've got this thing. Can I shoehorn this into, and as academics, you'll see a lot of this where somebody's taken an applied area and they shoehorn their favourite bit of work into it, which, it works and sometimes produces really good results, but obviously doesn't always. So that's the sort of theory through to translation research. Translational research you will see as a phrase in a lot of funding documents. It's worth knowing the magic phrases for funding documents. Applied research. What does applied research do? Well, if you're an applied research person, you start off often with a real application domain. You then are scouting for existing knowledge, and then you create an application. You make something that's really useful, but you will not get the same brownie points as an academic for doing that. If you're in industry, yes. And actually, it depends on the area of academia. Some areas of academia, this is lines, but within sort of computing digital areas, you do not get the same, you might produce really good work, so you might feel happy, but you do not get the same career advantages through doing it that way. However, I think there is something else that sits between the two, and certainly this, when I look back at not all work, I've done lots of work that perhaps is the first thing I talked about. You do some work, you have an idea, and you think, I wonder if I can apply that anywhere. But there's a whole bunch of work when I've looked back and realised that it follows a different pattern, and I think is quite a good pattern to look towards doing. So you start off with a real application. You want to do something that makes a difference to people. And this is particularly true if you want to do it reasonably quickly, rather than something that in 50 years' time might be useful. So you start off with a real application. It might be, for instance, some of the work I did on Tyree with the community work, where we had communication issues on the island. How to help people on an island that's the size of Manhattan, but only got 650 people know what's going on. Russell is working with FutureLearn and producing platforms there. So you have a real application. You use the existing knowledge to produce the application, that the actual piece of code, the app, the device that satisfies that need. So you're trying to create an intervention that does a real job. You want to do that in a timely fashion, so pretty much you have to use existing knowledge. You can't go off and do a 10-year research program to do that. That's just like standard applied research. However, as you are doing that process, what you're doing is looking out for what are the gaps in that knowledge. What were the things you didn't know that you've produced something, you've done the best job you can as a practical building job or a practical solutioning job or whatever, given the situation, given the knowledge. But what were the gaps that would have enabled you to do it better? Or possibly, what are the generalizations you learned from that? You know, did you create some, it might be a technical architecture, it might be a methodology that you use to do that, that actually you think, that would apply, I could use that over there, I could use that over there, I could use different systems. Use those to drive new research questions. So what happens is the research questions, the deep, the fundamental research questions, the ones that do need you to go off and spend a lot of time thinking and doing things which are almost like divorced from the application at that point, have been driven from needs that have appeared. Either for yourself or ideally would have ways of being able to pose these to each other, because actually in doing this process you might well come up with questions that are not the questions for you as a researcher, but might be the questions for people who work in the same area as you or in the same departments as yourself. So this is what I think of as an inspirational research. What you do is you're doing really applied work that makes a difference now, but using it as a springboard to think about, should we say, deeper is probably, I mean, all these words are so value-ridden, but should we say more fundamental theoretical research questions, but knowing that those questions have been driven by a real application. So as you address them, when you go to apply them, you actually they actually do make a difference to the world. Okay, and I think that is back onto Tyree and onto the beach.